My name is Erin. I'm 28 years old, and I've been married to my husband Brian for almost 4 years. We live in Portland, Oregon. A peaceful city, but one that sometimes makes me feel like I'm stuck between two worlds. One is the loving married life I have with Brian, and the other is the cold, uncomfortable world of his family. I knew from the first time I met them that they didn't like me. They didn't have to say anything. Their eyes, gestures, and sideways glances said it all. My mother-in-law, Carol, who just turned 55 this year, is the kind of person who demands perfection in everything, especially when it comes to people she thinks don't belong in this family. She has twin daughters, Haley and Jenna, who are 25, and a youngest son named Kyle who's only 23 but acts like the world owes him something. I'm not sure why they have such a problem with me. I'm not high maintenance or hard to get along with. On the contrary, I always try to create a pleasant atmosphere whenever I visit them. I bring gifts, join conversations, even help clean up after dinner, while the three siblings just sit there scrolling on their phones. Still, all I ever get in return is distance, a coldness so heavy it's suffocating. Even though Brian always defends me, I can tell he gets exhausted having to be caught between his mom and his wife. Once, after leaving his mom's house, I asked him, "Did I do something wrong? Do they really hate me that much?" Brian looked at me and slowly shook his head. "They don't hate you, Erin. They just don't want anyone taking the spotlight they've always had in my life." That answer left me speechless. I've always been someone who leads with kindness, and I believe that if I'm genuine enough, people will see it eventually. I didn't want Brian to have to choose between his mom and me, so I decided to take the first step and do something special for Carol, to turn things around. A month ago, I found out her 55th birthday was coming up. The idea immediately came to me. I would throw a cozy, elegant party tailored to her taste. Something refined, gentle, with a touch of nostalgia. Brian made a face when I told him, but he didn't object. "Are you sure?" "I'm not sure it's a good idea." "I know, but if we don't try, we'll never have a chance to fix this." I started planning that very week. I looked up the Italian restaurant she used to frequent when she was younger, the place she once said Brian's dad proposed to her. I called to make reservations, chose the menu, picked the seating arrangement, and even made sure the flowers were white orchids, her favorite. I handwrote each invitation and sent them to her close friends, whose names I got from Brian. I handled everything myself from start to finish. Brian helped confirm the guest list, but I took care of most of it. I even invited her 3 kids to help plan, but the response I got was, "Erin, if you want to do it, go ahead, we're busy." Not one of them offered to help. Not one asked if I needed anything. But I kept going, still believing that if the party turned out well, maybe, just maybe, they'd start to see me differently. I spent the entire month preparing. Every night after work, I sat alone at my computer, researching every tiny detail. I wanted that day to be the most special day of the year for Carol. I wasn't doing it to get credit. I did it because I believe in family, and I wanted to do something kind for the woman who gave birth to the man I love. Looking back, I don't know if I was just naive or overly optimistic, but I truly didn't expect that all the effort I put in would be met with a slap in the face more painful than any harsh word. I never thought I'd be the one throwing a birthday party for my mother-in-law, the same woman who's never smiled at me for more than 3 seconds straight. But I still did it, with all the heart and hope a daughter-in-law could possibly have. As everything began to fall into place, I felt both excited and drained, like I was getting ready for a major performance, one where the audience was just waiting to find fault. But I didn't let myself back down. I chose La Rocca, a restaurant downtown with a classic meets modern style, where glass lights hung from the ceiling like glowing drops of wax. I'd seen this place in an old photo in Carol's album. She stood next to her late husband Gerald, her eyes soft in a way I rarely see now. I knew if any place could stir something in her, it would be this one. I paid the full reservation 2 weeks in advance, no hesitation. The dinner was preset, with chicken parmesan as the main course, something she'd once mentioned during my first Thanksgiving dinner at their house. I even called the chef to adjust the menu for some of the older guests. For decorations, I hired a well-known local company that specializes in events for seniors. The flowers were carefully chosen, white orchids and baby's breath, paired with soft golden candlelight. Elegant, not overdone. I also ordered a custom 3-tier cake from a bakery Carol once complimented. On the cake I had written, Happy birthday, Carol. To the most wonderful woman in the eyes of those who love her. I spent a long time coming up with a message that felt heartfelt, not cheesy. For the guest list, I relied on Brian Fader's old friends, a few close relatives from his dad's side, and 2 longtime neighbors. I handwrote each invitation, used embossed stationery and wax seals, and sent them through the mail instead of just texting. I wanted everyone to feel the care in every detail. And my 3 in-laws? Not a finger lifted. When I messaged Haley and Jenna to ask if they wanted to handle gifts or games, their response was, "You're doing it, so take care of it, we've got work." Kyle flat out said, "I'm not good at organizing stuff, don't put that on me, Aaron." I sighed. At the time, I still tried to understand them. Maybe they really were busy, or maybe they just weren't mature enough yet to realize how important this was. I still believed that if the party went well, they'd see all my effort was about bringing everyone together. Not showing off. Brian saw me doing everything almost alone, so one time he pulled me aside as I was double-checking the flower order. "You're doing too much, Aaron. If my mom can't see that, maybe you're putting your heart in the wrong place." I smiled and gently said, "I'm not doing it for the recognition, I'm doing it for you, for our family." He didn't say anything, but I saw a mix of gratitude and worry in his eyes. The party was scheduled for Saturday evening at 6. I arranged for a photographer and chose 80s love songs for background music. The kind Carol used to dance to with her husband in the living room, according to Brian. Every detail was thoughtfully planned. Nothing was left to chance. On Friday night, I made final calls to the restaurant, the decorating team, and sent out reminder emails to the guests. When I shut my laptop and leaned back in my chair, I thought to myself, tomorrow is the turning point. I hoped that in the moment Carol walked into the candlelit room and saw all those familiar faces, her heart would soften. I allowed myself to dream a little. That she would look at me differently, not with suspicion but with acceptance. I had prepared everything, every detail, except for the one thing I couldn't predict: Carol's true reaction. That afternoon, Brian and I drove to his mom's house in the western suburbs. I carefully brought a small gift box with a silver ribbon, simple but elegant. Inside was a walnut double photo frame with a wedding picture of Carol and Gerald from 1989. I had spent the whole morning finding a place to print and frame it, hoping it would touch her heart. When we arrived, Haley and Jenna were already there, lounging on the porch with matcha drinks in hand, not looking the least bit rushed. Kyle was sprawled out on the sofa, totally focused on a phone game, headphones in so deep he didn't even look up when we walked in. Carol was in the kitchen, wearing a pale floral silk robe, her light blonde hair softly curled, and her face perfectly made up, as always. When she saw Brian, she lit up with a big smile and walked over to hug him tightly. "Oh, my son, you finally remembered the way home," she said, her voice full of affection. Then she turned to me. "Hello, Aaron." Just a short greeting, no hug, no warmth in her eyes. I took a deep breath and kept my voice steady. "We came to tell you something special." Brian gently squeezed my hand, as if to give me courage. He looked at his mom and said softly, "We've planned a little dinner party for tomorrow night at La Rocca. Everything's all set. I hope you'll enjoy it." Carol blinked a few times, then let out a small laugh. "Oh, so you're the one who planned it all?" Brian shook his head with a smile. "No, Erin did. She planned it from start to finish." In that moment, I saw the change in her eyes. Her expression shifted from surprise to cold, like I'd just said something offensive. I kept smiling, hoping she just needed a second to process. But no, she took a small step back, crossed her arms and pressed her lips together. "So? Erin's the one organizing it?" I nodded gently. "Yes. I know you like simple but meaningful things, so I tried to prepare everything thoughtfully. The restaurant, the food, the flowers, the guest list. All people you hold dear." She looked at me, her eyes unmistakably irritated. "Erin, I know you meant well, but I really don't think I need this." I froze slightly. "What do you mean?" She spoke slowly, enunciating each word. "Tomorrow is a special day. I want it to be simple, cozy, and just family. Not everyone counts as family." I was stunned, not by the words, but by the way she looked at me. Like I was a stranger who had walked into the wrong house. Brian immediately spoke up, his voice sharp. "Mom, Erin is my wife. If she's not family, then who is?" Jenna cut in with a smirk. She's just a daughter-in-law, it's not like she's blood. Haley added, we're not even sure we'll go. I heard they're gonna be a bunch of total strangers. It felt like I was being yanked out of reality. Every bit of effort I'd poured in, every tiny detail I'd planned, every late night tweaking the menu, all of it suddenly felt like a joke to them. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. If you don't want me to come, I'll respect that. But I just wanted to do something kind. I thought it would make you happy. Carol kept her frosty gaze. You know, Erin, sometimes trying to be kind just comes off as forced. I don't want to feel like I owe anyone. I didn't invite you to this party. Brian stood up abruptly. That's too much, Mom. But I held his arm. It's okay, I understand. I turned and walked toward the door, my legs like stone. But before leaving, I looked back at my mother-in-law and said firmly, even if you don't see me as family, Brian is my husband, and I don't need anyone's approval to know I belong. The room fell silent. As we got in the car, Brian didn't say a word the whole way. I didn't either. I just knew one thing. If Carol showed up at La Rocca tomorrow, she would no longer be the guest of honor. The next morning I woke up feeling drained and heavy, like I'd just come out of a bad dream. But it wasn't a dream. It was reality. Reality in which the woman I had put so much heart into honoring had outright told me I didn't belong in her family. Brian sat at the table holding a coffee cup, his eyes distant. I knew he was holding back his anger. All night long he'd barely spoken, just held my hand tightly on the drive home. Do you still want to go through with the party tonight? He asked, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. I set down my tea, took a long breath, then nodded. Yes, but not for her anymore. He looked at me. Are you sure? I've never been more sure. I picked up my phone and began sending messages to every guest who had received an invitation. The message was clear. Tonight's event at La Rocca will no longer be a birthday party for Carol, but we're still holding the dinner as planned, since everything has already been arranged. We'd love to have you join us, if you'd still like to come spend the evening with us. Most of Carol's friends responded politely, thanking me for the update. A few canceled, but the majority still planned to come. I even got a message from Rachel, Carol's close friend, that read, I'll be there, Erin. And not for Carol, for you. At least one person in Brian's family has their heart in the right place. It was the boost I didn't know I needed. Brian suggested inviting a few of our close friends, and I also reached out to my coworkers, those who had seen me spend countless hours planning a party that now had no purpose. We quickly shifted the idea into a relaxed, cozy evening with people who truly appreciated one another. I called the decorating company and asked them to remove all signs that said Happy Birthday, Carol, and replace them with a simple banner, An Evening to Remember. And just as planned, at 6 p.m. we arrived at La Rocca. The room glowed with candlelight, the aroma of food filled the air, the white orchids stayed in place, but this time not tied to anyone's name. People came in smiling, chatting. No one even mentioned my mother-in-law, as if she had never been the center of tonight at all. I wore the navy blue dress Brian had gifted me last year, kept my makeup soft and let my hair fall naturally. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the pressure to please someone. I was just myself, and that was enough to make the evening perfect. Brian raised his glass and said briefly, This is no longer the party my wife envisioned when she planned it, but honestly, it's become something even more memorable. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Erin, for always choosing kindness, even when it isn't deserved. My eyes welled up, but I smiled. The sadness in my heart slowly faded into the warmth of the evening. After most guests had left, Brian and I stood by the exit together. He gently wrapped his arm around my shoulders and whispered, I'm proud of you. I was about to respond when my phone started buzzing non-stop. Messages. From Jenna. You're so petty. You ruined my mother's birthday. Everyone's shocked at your selfishness. Mom cried all day. I let out a dry laugh, not even angry anymore, just tired. Then another message from Haley. Mom didn't deserve that. Did you really have to turn the whole party into your own show? I handed the phone to Brian. He scrolled through a few lines, then locked the screen. They only know how to blame. They never stopped to ask what they did to help create this mess. I nodded slowly. I used to want to make peace, to truly become part of their family. But today I realized Not everyone deserves your kindness. We left the restaurant late at night, a cool breeze sweeping through the trees. On the way home I posted a few photos on social media. No tags, no captions, just a simple line. Thank you for staying when others turned their backs. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had my answer. In the eyes of those who came for me, in the grip of my husband's hand, and in the laughter that filled the room all night. And that was the most precious gift I'd ever received. Sunday morning, after the emotional night, I woke up later than usual. The apartment was unusually quiet. The only sounds were the coffee machine and the soft breeze outside the window. When I stepped out of the bedroom, Brian was standing by the kitchen counter, holding an espresso, his eyes staring out at the balcony. I couldn't sleep, he said without turning. I sat down, wrapping myself in a light sweater. Me neither. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept thinking about what Jenna texted. The accusations, like, I'm the one tearing their family apart. Brian set his coffee down and walked over to sit across from me. You don't need to worry about it. Last night only proved one thing: the more we try, the more they take. I stayed quiet, still feeling a lingering weight inside. I never wanted things to go this far, but clearly the line had already been crossed. Erin, Brian said, his gaze now steady, I've thought about it a lot. I don't want to apologize to anyone. And you shouldn't either. In fact, it's time I did what I should have done long ago: cut ties completely. I looked at him, blinking. You're serious? He nodded. You know how they live. My mom hasn't worked since my dad passed. Kyle's quit his third job this year. Haley and Jenna have degrees but only work part-time at clothing stores before quitting. All four of them for years have relied on me. Rent, car payments, bills. I cover most of it. Every month there's a new reason to ask for money. I knew Brian helped his family financially, but I had no idea it was this extensive. Why didn't you tell me earlier? I asked softly. He looked down at his hands. Because I didn't want you to feel like a burden. I was afraid if you knew everything you'd feel guilty for me choosing you over them. But you know what? When my mom said you don't belong in this family, I realized you're the only one who's truly stood by me and valued me all these years. Not them. My eyes began to sting. So, what happens if you cut them off? Brienne sighed. They'll have to grow up. Or they won't, but either way it's not my responsibility anymore. He picked up his phone and opened an unread message from his mom. I glanced over and saw all caps, emotionally charged words. Brian, I can't believe you let Erin tear this family apart. You owe me an apology for letting that ridiculous party happen. Brian deleted the message and turned to me. I'm going to send them one final email, clear and respectful. That from now on I won't be providing financial support, and if they want to have a relationship it needs to be built on respect, not demands or blame. I nodded, feeling both anxious and relieved. Finally, what we'd been avoiding was being said out loud. That afternoon Brian sat in front of his laptop, calmly typing out the message with a rare look of peace on his face. When he hit send, I knew a new chapter in our life had just officially begun. A chapter where we no longer lived under the shadow of family expectations and pressure. That evening, as I cooked a light dinner, Brian walked into the kitchen and wrapped his arms around me from behind. You know, he whispered, for the first time in years, I feel light. I leaned my head against his shoulder and whispered back, we're doing the right thing. But deep down I still had a vague sense of unease. Because I knew Carol's personality, she wouldn't give up control that easily. And I had a gut feeling that last night's party was only the beginning of something much stormier. I had always known Brian to be strong, calm, and deeply responsible, but it wasn't until that night as we sat in the living room hand in hand that I truly understood the depth of the scars he carried, things he had kept hidden for so many years. I asked quietly, you never talked much about your dad. I know he passed when you were young, but I've never heard the full story. Brian looked at me, his eyes drifting into the past. After a moment he began to speak, slowly. I was only 21 when my dad died of a stroke. It happened so fast. My mom panicked, the kids were still in school. While my friends were partying through college, I had to drop out, handle the paperwork, the estate, and start working full-time to take care of the family. I squeezed his hand. What about the insurance money? Just enough to cover a few months of living expenses. After that it was all me, he said with a bitter smile. plus a mountain of student debt. Brian told me those early years were the darkest of his life. Working during the day, taking night classes. He worked at gas stations, made deliveries, even cleaned houses by the hour to make ends meet. Not because anyone forced him, but because he believed it's what his dad would have done if he were still alive. You know, my mom used to tell me I was the only man left in the house. Sounds empowering, but really it was a chain. I looked at him, my heart aching. I couldn't imagine the 21-year-old man I once knew carrying an entire family on his back while still figuring out who he was. "What about your company?" I asked. He nodded. "I started it from a small app I built in my spare time to help an old bookstore manage inventory. Then a few friends offered to invest. And it took off faster than I expected. That's when Brian started making real money, and that's when his family began to change. At first it was little things. Car repairs, school supplies. Then they stopped asking, just sent the bills directly to my account. One month, my mom called saying she needed a new dishwasher because the old one was too loud and gave her headaches. Kyle once used my credit card to buy a curved screen TV without telling me. I stayed silent. Every word Brian shared was like another puzzle piece falling into place, revealing a picture I'd only seen a corner of before. "And when you came into the picture," Brian paused, giving a sad smile. "They panicked." "Because I'm not easy to manipulate?" I asked, half joking. "Exactly," he said seriously. "You're smart, independent, and you don't just go along with everything they say. My mom couldn't handle that. She once told me you were going to steal me from the family. Haley even texted me, saying I should reconsider our relationship because Aaron seems too ambitious." I smirked. "Because I have a stable job and know how to save money?" "Because you don't bow down," Brian said firmly. "They're used to women in the family being obedient, easy to control, but you say no and that scares them." I remembered those early visits, the way Carol always asked things like, "Does Aaron change jobs often?" or "Are you planning to have kids soon so you can stay home and take care of Brian?" Seemingly harmless questions but loaded with expectations I never planned to meet. One time, Brian continued, "My mom met me at a coffee shop, just the two of us. She flat out asked me to reconsider marrying you. She said you'd break the bond between me and my siblings, that you didn't belong in a tight-knit family like ours." I bit my lip, holding back my anger. "What did you do?" I stood up and walked out. It was the first time I was ever truly mad at my mom. In that moment, I understood why Brian always kept a certain distance from his family. He never badmouthed them, but he also never pushed for long visits. Now I knew why. He had been silently carrying this burden for so long. "Aaron," Brian whispered, "if there's one thing I regret, it's not telling you all of this sooner. I shouldn't have let you struggle to earn approval from people I'm not even sure ever deserved it." I leaned my head on his shoulder, tears silently falling. Now I knew the full truth. And I swore to myself, I would never let anyone, even those who call themselves family, make this man suffer like that again. Just one day after Brian sent the email cutting off financial support, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Unknown numbers, hidden IDs, texts, emails, they came at me from every direction like a coordinated attack. At first I hesitated to answer, but by the 10th call from a number with Carol's area code, I knew exactly who it was. I put it on speaker and laid the phone on the table, listening silently. "Aaron, you're a shameless gold digger," Carol's voice burst out, no filter. "I don't understand how someone like you managed to blind my son. You came for his money, tore our family apart, and now you're cutting us off? Who do you think you are?" I didn't say a word. Next to me, Brian sat still, his eyes darkening. I knew he was holding back. Then came Jenna's high-pitched voice, practically screaming into the phone. "You don't have the right to make Brian turn his back on his family. You ruined everything. Our mom sacrificed her whole life for him, and all you do is take advantage. Then Haley, you'll never be part of this family. You're not welcome here and never will be." I ended the call without responding. Just minutes later, Brian's phone started buzzing. Messages from Kyle filled with blame, accusations, and plenty of cruel words about me. Some even claimed I had tricked Brian into signing over assets, that I was manipulating him for control. I looked at my husband, and for the first time I saw his hands trembling slightly. "They really think I can't make my own decisions," he said, voice thick, "like it's all your fault and they have no part in any of this." I took his hand and said softly, "No one gets to say you're a puppet. I know you're stronger than that, I thought it would stop there. I was wrong. The next afternoon, just as I was pulling into our driveway after a grocery run, a familiar SUV pulled up at the curb. The door opened, and out stepped none other than Carol, along with her 3 children. I froze for a few seconds, then rushed into the house and locked the gate, but before I could even reach the stairs, the doorbell blared loudly. Brian walked out ahead of me, looked at the security camera, then turned to me, expressionless. "It's them." I clenched my fists. "Don't open it." The doorbell turned into loud knocking, then shouting, loud and clear through the intercom. "Brian, open the door right now! We need to talk!" Brian stayed silent, but the knocking kept going, turning into pounding. With no other choice, I pressed the button to open the electronic gate, not to let them in, but to end this once and for all. As soon as the door unlocked, Carol stormed in, face flushed, pointing at me. "You have no right to come between a mother and her son. You're destroying our family." Kyle shouted, "You better step away before things go too far." I stepped into the center of the room and looked all 4 of them straight in the eyes. "If anyone is destroying this family, it's you. The ones who only take and never give." Brian gave up his youth to support a family that never showed any gratitude. And now that he wants to live for himself, you call it betrayal? Haley stepped forward, her voice dripping with contempt. "Shut your mouth. You don't understand us." I gave a dry laugh. "You're right. I don't understand how 4 grown adults can rely on one person for almost a decade without shame. I don't understand why, when the money stops, your first reaction is to attack instead of reflect." The room felt frozen. Brian stood up, eyes blazing. "Mom, I've made myself clear. From now on, I won't support anyone. If you want to stay in my life, you have to respect Aaron. If not, you're no longer welcome." Carol was speechless. Jenna opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand and said firmly, "You have 2 minutes to get out of my house before I call the police for trespassing and disturbance." The silence stretched endlessly before one by one they backed away. Carol turned first, but before stepping out she threw me a venomous glare. "You'll regret this." I stared back without blinking. "No, but maybe you will." I thought it would all end that day. The door had closed, the final insults were hurled, and they left our house in bitter silence. But I had underestimated their stubbornness and greed. Less than a week later, we received a letter from a law firm. The letterhead bore the name of a local legal company, and below was something I never imagined. Brian's mother and his 3 siblings had officially filed a lawsuit. In it, they claimed Brian had wrongfully taken their late father's inheritance, using it without consent to fund his startup and build his company. They demanded he return the startup capital, along with emotional damages, and a share of the business profits, which they claimed should be equally divided among the family. I sat frozen as I finished reading. Brian was silent, his eyes hollow like someone had just struck his heart. "I never used a dime from the inheritance," he whispered. "Dad left a small amount, but Mom withdrew it all right after the funeral. I didn't touch anything. Everything I built came from nothing." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then they can't prove anything. We'll fight this." We immediately hired our own attorney, Nancy Blake, a corporate finance expert with over 20 years in the field. She quickly got to work gathering financial records, investment contracts, and bank documents from Brian's early startup days. Brian also provided a complete history of his personal transactions, down to every last detail. But what worried us wasn't winning or losing. It was Brian's reputation. As the founder and CEO of a tech startup valued in the tens of millions, even a false but noisy accusation could scare off investors, clients, and destroy the trust he had spent years building. Less than 3 days after the lawsuit was filed, the story began leaking online. A small financial blog posted an article titled, "Bricks Tech Founder Sued by Own Family, Inheritance or Fraud." Though the content was just a summary of public court filings, it spread rapidly. Brian's business partners began sending cautious emails. A few clients paused projects to wait and see. Brian was exhausted but kept a calm face at the office. I, on the other hand, was furious, not just because they were smearing Brian's name, but because they knew he was innocent. They did it to force him back, to make him pay for cutting off their dependency. After nearly 2 weeks, a court date was set. Brian and I arrived early, walking in with Nancy in simple formal suits. On the plaintiff's side, Carol wore all black, face solemn like a grieving widow. Jenna had on sunglasses, Haley was glued to her phone, and Kyle looked like he was waiting for lunch. But within just 3 hours the truth fell apart like a cheap mask. Nancy presented bank statements clearly showing that on the day Brian received his first angel investment, his personal account held just $182. Every startup expense came from legal, contract-backed sources. One of the early investors, Martin Gates, who once worked with Brian's father, even submitted a handwritten statement affirming that Brian had refused to use family money despite being offered an interest-free loan. The judge didn't need more time. In the ruling, he dismissed the entire case and declared that the plaintiffs had knowingly submitted false claims intended to defame and harm the defendant's reputation. They were ordered to pay Brian's legal fees and a penalty for wrongful litigation. Carol was stunned, Jenna broke into tears, Kyle muttered curses. And me? I held my head high, watching them leave the courtroom with a weight lifted off my shoulders. We didn't just win the case, we reclaimed the truth. More importantly, when Brian and I stepped outside, he looked at me, his eyes bright for the first time in weeks, and said, "They tried to break me, but you're the one who kept me grounded." I squeezed his hand. "And I'll keep doing that until they never dare come back again." After the trial, everything seemed to shift overnight. A week later, I got a message from Uncle Robert, Brian's father's younger brother. Though he rarely got involved in family matters, this time he called, voice firm and serious. "Aaron, I want you to know, I stand with you and Brian. What Carol did is unforgivable." Turns out, once the verdict went public, the rest of Brian's extended family and longtime friends cut ties with Carol and her children. Some had lent her money she never repaid, others had suspected something was off but stayed silent. Now the truth was out. And the support for Brian was stronger than ever. I didn't feel joy in their isolation, but I also didn't feel sorry. You reap what you sow. As for the 3 siblings, after being forced to pay damages and court fees, they had to face the reality they'd been avoiding for years: life without Bank of Brian. Jenna posted a job hunting status on LinkedIn for the first time in 3 years. Haley went back to part-time work at a local flower shop. Kyle, the one who once mocked me for being just an office worker, submitted an application to be a security guard at a residential complex. I didn't gloat, but I felt at peace. Brian and I changed too. We started waking up early, jogging around our peaceful little neighborhood. Brian no longer flinched when his phone rang. Our dinners weren't interrupted by emergency calls. Needing a few $100s to fix the washing machine? One evening, as we sat together, sharing bowls of mint vanilla ice cream and flipping through our old wedding album, Brian looked at me and asked, "Do you think if none of this had happened, would I have ever found the courage to let them go?" I shook my head. No, but maybe. Fate chose the right moment. He was quiet for a while, then softly said, "I owe you so much." I turned to him with a gentle smile. "You don't owe me anything. I just did what's right. Protecting the person I love." From that day on, I made one unshakable rule in my heart. No one was allowed to bring harm near this man again. Even if they share his blood, if they don't bring kindness and respect, they have no place in our lives. My mother-in-law still tried to reach out after the trial. She sent a handwritten letter, filled with dramatic lines. "I only wanted to keep the family together. Aaron is the one who made it all fall apart." I read it, folded it, and tucked it into a drawer without replying. Sometimes, silence is the strongest response. We returned to our work, rebuilding the company's image after the scandal, and to our surprise, the public reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Many people empathized with Brian, even calling him a man brave enough to stand up against family manipulation. A local financial magazine even interviewed Brian, titling the article, "Leadership isn't just about revenue, it's about defending what you value." I read that article in the car while waiting for Brian to finish a meeting, my heart full of pride. He wasn't just my husband, he was a man with the courage to live authentically, to cut off toxic ties that not everyone is strong enough to walk away from. We decided to take a short vacation in Colorado, a place Brian had promised to take me ever since we got married. Surrounded by raw nature in a cozy wooden cabin nestled among pine trees, he held me under thick blankets and whispered, "This time, you've truly given me peace." I smiled softly, resting my hand on his chest. and I'll protect it forever. Because I've learned that happiness doesn't come from perfection, it comes from guarding it against the things that hurt us. And this time, I won't let anyone, not his mother, not his siblings, not some shadow from the past, take away the peace we fought for with everything in us. Through my own story, I realized that sometimes, the ones who carry the title of family are the source of our deepest pain, but it's because of that I've learned how to protect myself and the one I love from manipulation, control, and exploitation. Marriage isn't just about love. It's about walking together with courage through challenges that seem impossible to face. I have no regrets for standing up because from that moment on, we truly began to live a life of freedom and peace. What do you think about our story and how we faced injustice within the family? Leave your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt, powerful stories about life and family.